Welcome. My name is Jürgen Strauss, as Achille said. I'm working at ETH for more than 15 years together with Fabio Gramazio and Matthias Kohler, and I was lucky enough to have some research projects and some lectures and so on, and now I'm very happy to welcome you here in this Ideal, which is a new facility and allows us to develop this topic of architecture and acoustic far more than we were able earlier on. I do a mixture of historical and systematical approaches to our topic, and so we start very early on in the history of human mankind. No one of us, of course, has a specific memory for these early periods, but as we know today, given by the theory of evolution, our predecessors lived in water. And think about crocodiles, which is a good example. Crocodiles likes to live in water and hunting its prey in water, but then they go to the land and make a rest usually. And by doing so, they have to have perception for two different areas. One is the water. There is body sound in the water, and you may know that, for example, whales, but also dolphins and other animals are able to generate quite high sound pressure levels with their voices, and in water, of course, the transmission is very good, and the velocity of the vibration is very high, so it can expand quick and on a wide area. And if a crocodile, which is usually not able to generate sound, is very able to perceive this vibration in water. How is it doing that? And we can see it more clearly when the crocodile goes to the land. And then you see it has its big mouth and it lays it down to the ground. And imagine you wanna catch a crocodile from the backside, for example, and you make very slow steps. Do you think the crocodile will recognize it? Yes, it will. And it will recognize the angle in which you're approaching the crocodile. Very, very detailed. We know it from some experiments. And how is the crocodile doing it? It does it in the same way as we do localization with our two ears by using these two bones. These, I don't know the English word for kiever, however, these two bones are laid down on the floor. And the difference, imagine if we walk from this side, the vibration hits first this one and a little bit later this one. And this time gap is enough for the perception of the crocodile to be sure we are coming from this side, and so on, in the different angles. And when humans started evolving in this million years of process, they start lifting up their bones from the ground in whatever steps, and now it would be very helpful to have such capabilities of localization just given by air vibration or sound. And we know from morphology researches that evolution is not intelligent design. We have to talk about, of course, about all the ideas about intelligent designs, because it plays a very important role in this relation, in the historical relation of architecture and acoustics. But let's remain in this evolutionary perspective. We know in detail from morphologic studies that our ear is a second way to be sensitive for vibration to the form of this bone. The form of this bone is reproduced again in the inner part of our ear. And so it was just a new way to be sensible this time for vibrations in air, and we will have to discuss it with Jens Blaud, and spacious listening, and so on and so on. Plays a big role for sound reinforcement system, for stereophonic reproduction and other forms. How can we localize sound sources, and what happens if we are surrounded by sounds? And this is all, of course, given by and limited by our ability with 2 ears to localize, especially in the horizontal plane, and then with specific tricks, if I can call it like that, also in the vertical axis. So that we are sensitive for vibrations of air is very helpful for us, because there's a lot of information in sound waves. Think about air, wind movements, think about the noise of water, think about the sound of animals, friendly animals or dangerous animals, and so it's very helpful to get a lot out of this, a lot of information out of these vibrations which occurs in air. And for the bigger part of history of human mankind, it's safe to say that there are no written words. As you know, we have written words coming from this Iran, Babylon, Mesopotamia, range maybe around 6,000, maybe 8,000 years before Christ. But history of human mankind is usually set to around 100,000 years or a little bit more. So you see, the oral tradition in human mankind is of highest importance for the development of any types of basic society, and then further on to build up cities and to change the face of the earth until today. So it's safe to say that at first humans were very sensible to voices, and they had to have a very good memory for voices, and they had to memorize all the stuff based on signals coming from voices. There was no other way, and it's easy to imagine that if there is no other way to memorize things, what's going to happen, or wisdom you have, you want to share experience, especially regarding building, of course, and so on. Everybody was supposed to train his memory very well, and writings, and later on, of course, all our recording technology of today, is a type of exteriorization of our memory. So it helps us keep things alive, and without having them directly in our memory. But in earlier times, we know, as far as our sources reach, there were many very professional speakers around, and they transmitted news. What did the king say? What happens in the battle? Is there something bad happening on the fields, or whatever it is? And they had to memorize those stories, and they went from place to place and told the stories. And behind this background, step by step, they developed a set, as far as we know, sets of little stories, little epos, little epic histories, and they start to collect them and to transmit them by professional speakers. And the professional speaker in this early period of time was always a type of an actor. He uses gesture much more, and he's walking around, and he is almost playing the scenes he's talking about. Think about pantomimos. They are trying to show you an action without using words, just by using their bodies. And you have to think about that this is a mixture of theatrical actors and transmitting the news, the informations they want to give to others. And the same applies to the relation between speech and music. We have to imagine that it was much more music inside the speech, and the music is strongly related to speech. So if we think about early pieces of music, it's mostly for theaters written. There was some pure instrumental music, but it was mostly related to words. And so the connection between voice, speech, gesture, and music, we have to imagine this was very close. The most famous and earliest orators in Greece and elsewhere, for example, Orpheus, he was both a singer and a speaker. Later on, all these players coming up to the stage with a guitar and singing a song, for example, the Roman Caesar Nero, he was famous for his attempt to being the best guitar player and speaker in its period. And on his dying bed, he said, "I want to be recognized as a singer and guitar player and not as a Caesar." So it was more important for him. And he was famous for his chanting, not because he was very good, but he was very cruel and brutal. And if he didn't win the contest, somebody has to suffer. So he was famous and he did it. And this tradition of combining gesture with musical aspects like rhythm, like dynamic, like sound colors in a speech is also very well known by Cicero. He wrote a book about the speakers, and he strongly recommends to use gesture to impress the audience and to make sure that the things you want to get through are going through, and also using strong dynamics in your speech. So make pauses, get loud, show your feelings, put them in gesture. And if you compare that to what we are doing today, you see we are very, very moderate. If you look in a European Parliament of today, everybody is calm, is quiet, talks moderate, not too much dynamic, not too much changing of rhythms, no pathetic impact. It remains all ethical. It shall be correct, it shall be moderate, and so on. And I had a chance some year ago to listen to speeches recorded on the central place in Bern in front of the parliament, and these were female voices, and they were asked, "What do you think about what's going on in the parliament?" And the answers came quick, loud, decisive, and very dramatic. And if you do the same today, you see it's not going to happen. It's much more moderate. So, however, these are just some impressions on how the use of the voices changes over the time. I want to start with the first, and I refer always to primary books, primary sources in my speech, and the first one is the Gilgamesh epos. Let me ask you, is somebody know this Gilgamesh epos, which is the first epic story, the first epos in, as we know, of some extended length in history of human mankind, written in and around Uruk, some 2,500 years before Christ. Did you ever read it? It's easily available today, and I can strongly recommend it because it's a really impressive story and very dramatic. I just focus on the main topics as far as they are related to us. Gilgamesh is a follower, the son of a son of a son of a son of Noah, and you know Noah as a figure coming from the Jewish Old Testament, and Gilgamesh is therefore able, after the big flood, and this big flood, which is described in the first 5 books of the Jewish Bible, this flood is described in the Gilgamesh epos. And the first 5 books of the Old Testament are typically dated at around 1200 to 1400 before Christ, and the Gilgamesh epos is 2500 years before Christ or older. The oral traditions which led to this epos are much older. Today we assume it's maybe 4 to 5,000 years before Christ, and this epos is a collection of different stories told by this oral tradition, then collected and by different authors put down in words, and then with a final reduction it became this epos we know today. And we know this epos today because the library of Assurbanipal burned down, and therefore these clay writings, these signs in clay were properly burned, and so they remain until today. Otherwise maybe this epos would have gone. However, in this epos we see Gilgamesh is a grandson of Noah in this tradition. And Gilgamesh is a young man, very beautiful man, very strong man, and he is the king of the first town on earth, which is Ur in their point of view. And Gilgamesh is type of a king of this town, let's say a chief. It's maybe a king, we don't know. And I have to say, it's not sure if Gilgamesh is a historic person or just a legend. It could be both. The same applies for Orpheus and other famous figures coming from antiquity. It's not always sure if they are really historic persons or not. And in case of Gilgamesh, we can assume it was a historic person, and he had, as I said, strong capabilities. He was a strong man, he was a beautiful man, he was a king, but he has his strong downsides. He was very cruel and brutal, and therefore the gods decide to send him a friend to help civilize him, to make him acceptable in his behavior, because he did as a king in his town whatever he wanted, and mostly it was brutal and cruel. But where does the authority come from Gilgamesh that he was type of a king in this first town? And this is very interesting for us, because what Gilgamesh knew and nobody else knew was how to build proper temples for the goddess. How to build an appropriate temple for the god or the gods. There are different approaches, maybe one god, maybe more. But how to do it. And Gilgamesh was the only person after the big flood who knows it. And so he was type of a first architect in this regard, which had the knowledge of how they built the temples before the big flood. And how did he do that? And this is one of the first examples for that what we call inspiration. He had this knowledge direct from this God, which gave it to Noah, and Noah founded this tradition, and Gilgamesh is part of this tradition. And as the text lays out, Gilgamesh himself is also directly inspired with this knowledge coming from the gods. So we see in this very early stage of human mankind civilization, the God of the forefather is presented as a God who has clear ideas about how a temple should be shaped or proportioned so that it's worth to be the center place of a town to worship this God. And in the following I will show you this is not the only example for why architecture and the proportion of specific buildings, especially of course the temples, had to be in accordance to the plans originated by the gods or the god. The second example I want to mention is the so-called Enuma Elish. This is an epos which describes the origin of the world from a Babylonic point of view. This text is around 1,000 years younger, so it was written around 1,500 before Christ, and is also strongly based on a huge tradition of oral transmission of certain elements of this world of the gods, and how they fight with each other, how they fight also with humans, and describing how humans and gods are related to each other. In this Enuma Elish, it is described how the first temple was built in Babylon. And you have to imagine that Babylon was for a very long period of time the most important and biggest town on earth. And we know today there were two periods in Babylon in which they were really on high prosperity. The first period was around 2000 before Christ up to 1200 before Christ, and then the big crisis arises at the end of the Bronze Age, and all the high civilizations around the eastern part of the Mediterranean, from Egypt to the Levante to Syria, Iraq and Iran, and all this range of Mesopotamia, where they collapsed around 1200 before Christ, and it's not really clear until today why, but all these civilizations collapsed. At the end of the Bronze Age, it was type of a reset, and to recover it took around 500-600 years, especially in Babylon. We can see this very clearly. And then the famous king Nebuchadnezzar, which then took the Jews to Babylon, and therefore we have the sources from the Jewish side on what's happened in Babylon in this period of time. We see that Babylon has these two periods, and the Enuma Elish clearly refers to the first period. And in this period, the god, the most important god, was called Marduk. And Marduk wanted to have a town for himself, his center town. So this is his capital, as we would say today. And that's the origin of Babylon in their point of view. And in the center of this town, of course, there should be a place for Marduk himself. And Marduk is also an architect god. He has a plan. He wishes to have this town, and he wishes to have this temple in the center of the town. And on top of this temple, he wants to have a room reserved for himself. And he wants to visit the town whenever he wants, to be a part of it, because he created it, and he wanted to stay there and to participate, and also to interact with humans. So gods and humans can strongly interact in these early imaginations of how the world originated, and what is the role of gods, and what is our role within this world created by the gods. We call this world usually the gods of the forefathers, and we differentiate from this huge variety and very rich tradition of imaginations, how the gods installed and created world, from the perspectives we will talk on next time, where it is about the gods of the philosophers, which is type of an abstraction of these gods of the forefathers. Let's come back to Babylon and Marduk. So Marduk first ordered his godlike companions to build up this town, but they quickly came back and said, building is a hard work to do. We are sweating, and we do not like to sweat. So let's find another way to build up this town. And this was the moment in which human mankind was created. So we are the helping workers for the gods to build up the towns and so on. And otherwise we would not exist. So you see a very anthropomorph picture of the gods. The biggest god, Marduk, is type of an architect. He has an idea, he has a plan, he wants to realize it. Then they recognize building is tough job to do. They have to sweat, they do not want to sweat. And Marduk is supervising all what's happening, the building process in Babylon, and he sees, it goes on quite well. And at a certain point he decides to go already down, even if the temple is not really finished, and so there were some layers left to build, but he want to see the work progress and steps down to his temple, and then lay down on top of this temple and want to take sleep. The gods like quiet situations, especially Marduk. He doesn't like noise, he likes it to have it quiet. But building is a noisy process. And so he was disturbed by all the noise humans made by building the town and especially the temple. And so he left again and said, okay, I come back when the building is done. So you see the noises of the building process and the noises down on earth, which is disturbing, is a very old picture, and in some respects still valid until today. We like to have quiet situations, but also, of course, in a town there is always some noise, and the feelings we have regarding this situation is quite different. In some respect, noises of a town, voices of others, and traffic and whatever it is something lively, and we feel life by hearing such sounds. But on the other hand, especially at night, of course, we want to have it quiet. And this story of Marduk resembles also a much younger history or story coming from Jewish range. There is almost the same story. Adam, the first human, is in heaven, and he sees how God is building up the earth, and the earth's building is not completed, but Adam is watching down from the sky and sees, wow, it's paradise. This is really a good place to live. I want to go there. And because he's not patient, he jumps too early in this story. And so earth was not finished. It was not everything was properly built in proportion. There is not just music, playing harmonies and stuff like that. It was not really a finished and complete paradise. So there was some chaos, there was some mess, there was some dissonances, disproportionate things are going around, and God then tells to him, now this is your job, finish it by culture. Find out the rules in which I build up what I did. You jumped too early, now you have to finish it, do it. So this is just a little story, a little bit comparable to that what Marduk did by ordering his first town and his first temple. He had to leave, finish it at first, and then it's a proper living space to be. In the 6th century before Christ, we have from Hesiod, a Greek author, a description of Babylon. He visited Babylon, and today we think this really happened. It was possible, and we assume it really happened. And maybe Hesiod was not the only one in the 6th century before Christ who visited Babylon. The second one, maybe more important for us, certainly more important for us, is Pythagoras. I will talk about Pythagoras and this concept of harmony of spheres, which is the basis then for the theory of proportions, and also the theory of harmony in music next time. But this time I want to just focus on how the ideas and the forms coming from the East were perceived and took over in the Greek cultural range by authors like Hesiod. He visited Babylon, and this text is also easily available. Also the Enuma Elish, all these texts are on the table. Hesiod describes, I think, quarter of his text describes just the walls of the town of Babylon, because Babylon was maybe the first town, maybe a town with very, very strong fortification walls. And that's the first thing Hesiod mentioned about Babylon. So it was not the temple or how they live or the markets or whatever it is. It was about the town walls. Why is this so significant? We know this, for example, from another text coming from the 5th century before Christ, Aeneas. There you have the so-called polyocratics authors. They describe in detail how a polis in this period of time have to be built and organized with all type of secret language, all types of warning signals, all types of inner organization hierarchies and so on, to make sure that you're able to defend yourself in case you are attacked. And Aeneas is a Greek author living in today's Turkey, so in the eastern part of Greece, in the diaspora. And it was just normal, it was just a question of time that your neighbor is coming after you and want to take all what you have and kill them. So it was really a tough period of time, and behind this background it's no surprise that Hesiod at first described this absolutely impressive town wall to make sure, or to give the readers and listeners an impression about the specifics of Babylon. But he brought much more with him, like Pythagoras did. He mentioned especially the role of music in this city, and the conceptualization of music in this city. And when he wrote down, Hesiod is a companion, or lives in the same period as Homer, and Homer describes us all the struggles between humans and gods, how they interact, how the humans are going after each other there, especially in the Iliad. This is just a description of endless battles, and so life is a struggle, and it's not only a struggle amongst humans, it's also a struggle with the gods who want to interact with us and want to give us a direction in which we should develop. But here with Hesiod in his work called Theogony, it's not a theology, logy comes later, this is a theogony. Usually this text is understood as the founding text for Europe traditions, because it describes right at the beginning the Olymp. So the living space is the palace of the Greek god Zeus and his wife Hera, and all the other gods living there, Apoll and so on, and especially also the Muses. And Hesiod himself describes, says, I'm just a shepherd. I live at the foot of the Olymp, and there is some nice rivers, you have trees, you have flowers, you have different animals, and he's living there and going around with his sheep. And in the morning hours, in sunrise, the Muses, which usually lives on top of the Olymp, and the Olymp is described as a palace with many different rooms, and all day and all night in every room is music. So music, the presence of music is always connotated not only with harmony and getting together. There can be, of course, also dissonances in this music, but generally, when music is there, you get into type of a better life, or let's say an improved life. And the gods, of course, like the best forms of life. And as you know, Zeus and Hera and all these figures, all these gods are purely anthropomorph gods. Humans, but god humans. And as we then know, with the following history, they get close to humans and have child together and so on. So there's a very close and even sexual interaction between gods and humans, creating half-gods and so on and so on, nymphs and so on and so on. So Olymp is a place where day and night music is playing, the muses are dancing, and at the end of the night, when sunrise comes, the muses goes down from this mountain called Olymp. You can visit it, it's there, and we have a lot of remainings there. And they go down into this landscape with rivers and so on. And then they start to inspirate figures like Hesiod himself, such shepherds, with music. So they play the flute, imagine the pan flute, they start dancing, and they wouldn't do so without the inspiration coming from the muses. And the muses turn directly to Hesiod, and he was very impressed that they did, and they talked to him, and they said, we come sometimes to visit you, and we have two different types of stories to tell you, not just music, we have two different types of stories to tell you. We can tell you the truth in the sense of things that really happened, but we are also able to lie. We can give you some false stories, and it's up to you to decide which one leads you to truth and which one gives you the direction into a false world. So with the inspirational work of muses, human becomes two different options to conceptualize their situation and to act in situations. One is going in direction of truth and stay with the truth, and the other one is to find out nice stories which may be just untrue, just lies, but helps you to go forward. And Hesiod is very much impressed by that, and as we know in his further description of the origin of the world and how it's arranged and so on, he used his fantasy completely free, knowing that he's telling things where there is absolute no empirical basis for. So this is not strictly a lie, but he uses it in a way that it turns into type of lie stories, to put it this way. So you see, at the Olymp, music plays an important role, and as in the first text of Gilgamesh, and also then in the Enuma Elish, the figure of inspiration, that the gods sometimes give some exceptional persons, think about Moses, think about Jesus Christ later on, or in this case Hesiod, or earlier on in Gilgamesh, give humans specific ideas about the origin of the world, the placement of humans inside the world, what they should do or not do, how to build or not to build, how to play in music or not to play in music. All these things comes to humans from the gods by inspiration. This is the most basic figure humans thought, as far as we know from these books, how they comes to specific knowledge, especially true knowledge, so that they can use it and that it's reliable. I want to finish with the hint on the so-called Turmbau zu Babel, the building of the tower at Babel, which is described also in the first books of Genesis, of the first part of the Jewish Torah, Bible. This is directly to the point for our Jewish Christian tradition and European tradition, which connects the themes of building and finding language, speaking to each other. I'm sure most of you will know the story, but I will tell it in short. There's a period of time in Babylon, no surprise, and the Jewish were kept in hostility in Babylon in the 7th century before Christ, so they had a deep knowledge about Babylon and its culture, and when they came back, they had this knowledge in their package, of course, and one of the stories they brought with them is this building of the tower at Babylon. And the story goes like that. The Babylonians decided to build a tower as big, as huge, as high, that it's able to reach the sky. And where is the sky beginning? The sky is beginning in these traditions on a level above the moon. they make two different spheres. There's a sphere below the moon, and there's a sphere above the moon. And they want to build a tower which goes up to the moon or beyond. And why do they want to do that? This is not described in the Bible, but there are other sources. They want to catch a direct view to the sky with the stars and the planets and their movements, because they have their imagination. If you watch the movement of the planets and the stars at night from Earth, there is always some uncertainty. But if we would be able to get to the level of the moon, there is nothing which disturbs the picture of the movement of the stars and the planets. And the imagination was, we will see this in Pythagoras, that then you will see perfect proportion, and you can hear, maybe, it's not sure, Pythagoras, they said he could hear it as the only human, because he was inspired. He could hear the harmony of spheres, so that every planet turns in the right circle, and altogether a tone is in this picture, the difference or the distance between two planets. The distance between two planets makes a tone in this regard. And so from Earth we cannot hear it, and as far as we can see the movements are not really perfect. They recognize this early on. They had the imagination to get up to the moon would make it possible to see the perfect harmony of movements and tones in the sky. And so they start building this tower, and God watches it, and he see, wow, the humans are really strong, and they have one language, and they are connected. They can communicate and inform each other with this one language without any problem. And they come from different areas around Babylon. They were brought to Babylon, most of them, of course, slaves, but they have all the same language. And so they started to build, and God watches it and see, well, they really can do it. They are able to build this tower. There's nothing there who can stop them. And God recognizes it and thinks, it's not so clear, the description in the Bible, why he's acting now, but he stops the building process by disturbing their one language and make many different languages. So they have a translation problem, they cannot communicate easily, and so the building process is stopped because God decided to divide the one original language into many different languages. And today we know there is really a place, you can visit it, where they try to build this tower, but it's quite small. So chance to get to the moon is really small. Later on in the 17th century, for example, Athanasius Kircher, a Jesuit, asked himself how much of clay and workers and working hours would be required to build such a tower, and he's described it, and he makes also some pictures. Then it's really a big tower, and his idea is God stopped the building process, because if they really built such a big tower, the harmony of spheres would be disturbed. So the Earth would get into a tumbling movement, and God cannot accept that the planet Earth starts tumbling around. So to make sure that the harmony of spheres is still there and the Earth is in the center of all of it and not stumbling around, made it necessary to stop the building process. And think about what we humans today can do, and already did over the period of time. We are really able to change at least the surface of the Earth quite significantly, especially at night. You can watch it easily. Europe is quite a shiny place at night, and many other places too, of course. And our building power is really huge, and we will see where it goes. Is there an end to this interruption of communication by different languages described in the Bible? Does somebody know this? Now we are with this story of the Tower of Babel. We are in the Old Testament and in the Newer Testament? No, nobody knows. This is the action that happens during Pfingsten. I don't know the English word for it. It's a certain day in the year where the so-called Holy Spirit was sent from the sky, inspirational, was sent from the sky to the first Christian group in Jerusalem. Ausgießung des Heiligen Geistes heißt das für die Deutschsprachigen. So the God opens up the sky and makes it possible to inspire the speakers gathering together in Jerusalem in a house, it's described. And the house was full of people coming from different areas, having different languages. They come from Babylon, they come from Syria, from Egypt, from wherever it is. They gathered in this house, the windows were opened, and when God came to this place, they recognized the strong wind. And then the speakers start speaking, and now a wonder happens. And what was the wonder? The wonder was that whoever speaks, coming from different places around, whoever speaks was inspired by God, and whatever they speak was understood by everyone without any translation problem. And the conclusion of this happening in Jerusalem was the first formation of a Christian community. So the first Christian community founded in Jerusalem by these inspired speakers are the first ones who enjoys no borders in language. And therefore they are now also, and this is then the later reception of this actions in Jerusalem, now they are back again and are able to communicate freely with each other as far as they are Christians, because they are now inspired. And now this power to, for example, to build together is back again. And as it is described in the Old Testament, there is no limit to the building power of humans. They can do whatever they want. And that was the point why God intervened and said, stop this building process. But later on in the New Testament, which God made with the Jewish peoples and then also for all the Christians, in this New Testament, he gives back somehow this building power to us, because we are now able as Christians, because we understand each other as Christians. It's a new type of community. And this community is now able to build up a society, to build up towns, to build up whatever they want. Their power is basically unlimited. And so you see in this old world of the God, of the fathers, the anthropomorph approach to what is a God is obvious. And these gods are type of super spirits, super intellectuals, and sometimes they decide to inspire humans and to give them a chance to participate to the truth, which is basically the design or the plan on how the world is built, and all the plants and all the animals, and finally the humans and its place. And by having an insight to that and having a knowledge about that, humans are able to build in the same way, based on the same design principles as the goddesses did, or God did. You see this? Yeah? No? Was it not obvious? No? Give me some reactions. Otherwise I will explain more. No comments? No comments? Did you understood? Or do you think you did?
I think I understood it.
More or less?
More or less.
Okay. Shall I put it again in a very short summary?
Maybe.
Maybe? Yeah. Well, in early periods, you may look to Uruk, first town. You may look to Babylon, most important town for a long, long period of time. You may look to Greece, you may look to the Old Testament and then also to the New Testament. The God or the gods are imagined and proposed as a type of humans. And humans, of course, had experience with what it means to build together, to communicate together, and to make building processes possible. You do that, you are able to do that, you collect the materials or whatever it is. And by using language, they gather their power, and together they are able to build even such complex structures like towns and temples, specific buildings. And in this anthropomorphic world, where the gods are type of humans, this experience of this building experience humans collected over the period of time was then projected to the sky, to the world of the gods, to the other, and it was the idea that they had the original plan of what's going on in the world as a whole, and specifically on planet Earth, and specifically on what we as humans can do or not do. I will give you another example. This is also coming from the 6th century before Christ, and this is now specifically Greek philosophy. This is Parmenides. He lived in Italy, somewhere southeast of Naples, very peaceful time. And Parmenides describes a young man who's in search for the truth. He wants to really know what's the core of the cosmos as a whole, and specifically here on Earth, and he want to know what is the inner logic, what is the inner structure of this building as far as the world and Earth is a building, and his understanding is it is a building. But he want to have more than only opinions and talks, what we are doing here when we exchange opinions about what is going on and what's the origin and so on. He want to have the truth. And what does he have to do? He has to find a way to get to heaven. So he has to do a vertical journey. And if he's lucky enough, the gods open the door. And so he decided, yes, I want to go up there. And it is described, there are horses, specific horses, which are able to bring him up directly to the sky. And he was a lucky young man. The goddess, in this case Daiki, it's called, open up the door and want to know, young man, what are you searching for? And he was a frank man, and he said, I want to know the truth. And the goddess said, okay, you're the one. A specific person, not everybody, not all of us, but this young man shall have at least a glimpse of that, what is the truth. And now what happens? The goddess led him to a room, brought him to a table, so it's described, and there's a role, a plan, and the goddess is the safeguard for this plan. And she said to him, just for some moments, I present you the original plan of the world. And now she rolls it out, and the young man can have a look to this plan, and he is watching. And here you also see something very specific and interesting about the relation between eyes and ears, and we will come back to this topic in different forms. He can see this plan, and therefore the evidence of what you can see is regarded as a much higher evidence and value, because it's closer to truth than what you can hear. And that's exactly what the goddess tells him. Now you can watch. Now you can see with one view the whole thing, with all the details. Watch and have a look. But what you can get when you go back to Earth is just talking, opinions. It's just what you can hear. And that's never certain. And it may pick up a bit of the truth, but it's certainly not the truth itself. The truth itself lays in the plan, and you can only watch it. So the vision, a visionary approach to whatever, to architectural plans or to political plans or whatever is. This is in the European tradition always this same moment of an inspiration based on what eyes can see. And here this young man gets a view of the whole, and therefore he's very close. In fact, he's in front of the truth, and he can see it. And then he has to go back and talk about it, and all the opinions, and all the communications, and misunderstandings, and so on and so on, getting on. So I hope you get an idea about this relation of architecture and acoustics related in this case to voices and speeches and what they can and what they can't in this early period of human civilization, coming up from this Uruk Babylon context to Greece, to the Jewish tradition and then Christian traditions, in which always the god is a type of an architect. He has a plan, there is a realization, there are different ideas how they do it, and finally they place humans inside and they have to play their role. And specifically their role is to talk to each other, to organize each other, and to build up types of societies, and then later on, of course, the first town, Ur. Okay? So thank you.
Thank you too.
So, some questions, some ideas, some opinions.
I didn't really get the part with this one tone created by the orbit of the planets, or like the distance between the planets.
Yeah.
What was the idea, the concept behind it?
Well, I will come back exactly to that next time when when I will talk about Pythagoras. And Pythagoras is the one who brought the knowledge from Babylon to Greece. In earlier times, for example, Plato thought that this knowledge Pythagoras had in the 6th century before Christ came from Egypt, but today we know it better, it comes from Babylon. And just to give a short layout, the so-called four Pythagorean mathemata is this strange combination, you may have heard about it, is this strange combination about eye, which can observe the movements of the planets, and we know that the observation of the movement of the planets happened very early on in history of mankind, much earlier than everything we have from Babylon. There are many traces leading back 10,000 years and more, because this was of high importance, of course, for time in the year, bring out fruits and stuff like that, and much more than that. And Pythagoras brought this four mathemata to the Greek range and then to the European range, which connects in a very specific way what you can see on the sky, so astronomy, with geometry. Think about all the Tierkreiszeichen, animal signs. You can see the bear and the lion and whatever it is. These are elementary geometric figures based on triangles and others. And of course, the circle is playing an absolute important role in the harmony of sphere. I come back to that. So elementary geometric figures combined with observation of the sky, which is both related to the sense of the eye. And on the other side, you have arithmetics combined with music theory. And music theory is the theory of how to count the hits. A sound, a tone, a pitch is described as a line of hits, of little sounds of a rhythm, and the ear is always understood as a counting sense. The ear is always counting, and so because it's a counting sense, it's related to arithmetics, and then it can combine these numbers, it counts. And on the other side you have the eye, which is connected to geometry, and these four Pythagorean mathematas come then into the hands of Plato, and then of course of the Stoic school, and then the Neoplatonic school, and then throughout all the Middle Ages it was the natural philosophy of the Christian students which want to be students of theology. So they always had a natural philosophy part, and this was always this tradition coming from Babylon by Pythagoras coming to Greece, and then through the Roman Stoic approach, which is basically a Platonic approach to the Christianity, and it ends around the period of Leon Battista Alberti in the early Renaissance. Alberti had to search for a teacher who's able to give him an introduction into this for Pythagorean mathematas, because in the 15th century this was pushed back by all the reception of Aristotle and his concepts of sky and so on. But Alberti was very, very much interested in having this knowledge about the four Pythagorean mathematas, and there it's described. A tone is always is the distance between two planets, and therefore there is a harmony, and it's an interval. A tone is not a specific frequency like chamber tone A for 140 hertz. It's an interval between 2 points. So it's a different concept of tone as we use it today, but it's a very interesting approach, and it's an old approach, of course. And the other aspect I want to mention is we talked here about voices and language, and this is the second part of the natural philosophy coming out of this tradition. This is the trivium. This one, the first one, the four Pythagorean mathematas, is called the quadrivium. This is the basis in the Middle Ages. And the trivium was the more important part. This is the part where the gods inspired us, for example Pythagoras and others, to talk, to use language. And by using the language, or by using more the mathematical capabilities of us, with these two different powers humans have, we are able to get a glimpse and a deeper insight into that, what the God's plan is by building up nature. So this was the approach. And this one, the trivium, is grammatic, rhetoric, and logic. So more on the language side and more on the mathematician side. And so you see, until today, we use this decision. There is a more language-orientated studies, and there is more natural philosophy and mathematically orientated approach to nature and to understanding the world. And this remains a bit until today. Okay? Others? I see you are a bit tired. The day is long. You was already a little bit sleeping. Feel free, no problem. Other points, interests, hopes? If not, I thank you again, and we will see us next time.
Gut. Jetzt haben wir